All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on episode 158 of Blowback, Exposing Imperial Decline. I am one of your co-hosts, Billy Bob, and I've got my other two co-hosts, Ian Cummer, streaming live from a suburb in Moscow, and Carlo Parcelli, streaming live from Washington, D.C. I am on the left coast, and our special guest today is Greg Rosen, streaming live from Chicago, Illinois. So thank you guys for joining us, our special guest and my co-hosts. Thank you so much. Our episode today is titled Peace Prize Politics. That is a reference to the summit on Friday, kind of a surprise summit, and then the follow-up meeting we had yesterday in the White House. And so I do want to just go over the basic timeline that has happened here. So originally, Trump said he's got a 50-day. I've already lost my train of thought. 50-day ultimatum, to Putin. Agree to a ceasefire or else. And then, very shortly after that, he decided to change from a 50-day ultimatum to a 10-day ultimatum. And then it was like day 8. All of a sudden, we hear about Witkoff going to Moscow on a surprise visit. So it's pretty obvious that, Putin didn't care about his stupid 10-day ultimatum. And it seemed like, Trump didn't want to look foolish for, putting a useless ultimatum out there that nobody cared about, right? So in order to avoid that, from happening, he sent Witkoff. And I really believe, and I've been maintaining this for a while now, that Trump is genuinely interested in getting submitting a reasonable offer to Putin and Russia that they could possibly accept. Now, there's several reasons in my mind that the United States and the Trump administration against the interest. I don't know about the interest, but against the preferred strategy of other people domestically, like Lindsey Graham and all the war hawks, right? So they don't really seem interested in achieving or even offering Russia an acceptable peace. But the Trump administration seems genuinely interested in offering Putin an acceptable peace. And to that end, I think they have been working behind the scenes. And I think there's some frameworks in place. And I think there's been some things offered and some things accepted. And I think these things were more cemented on Friday. I don't think Putin would have bothered meeting Trump in Alaska if Trump had not demonstrated a willingness to put certain acceptable terms on the table. I think it was Trump demonstrating to Putin that a willingness to offer acceptable terms that resulted in Putin agreeing to meet in Alaska. And we all know how that meeting went very well. The Western media was frantic. The EU and Ukraine was frantic because, Trump really identified with Putin's desire not for a ceasefire, but for a comprehensive peace agreement. So now you have Europe and you have Ukraine, and they're kind of intransigent. They're kind of, it's hard to imagine that they would be acceptable to any kind of peace framework that Russia could also accept. They're just so far apart, especially in their rhetoric. And so, the question is, how does this play out from here, where you have Trump seemingly interested in agreeing to a deal that is acceptable to Russia? And again, that's a big assumption on my part, right? So that's my first assumption is this is being offered. And then the question becomes, if that assumption is correct, the question then is, what does the European Union and Ukraine do in response? Are they going to be intransigent and say no? Are they going to agree and just try and subvert it, but not look like they're being so intransigent? So we had this meeting on Monday with all the EU people and Zelensky, and what resulted from that? It seemed that the EU people didn't seem too happy. They didn't seem. I remember at that meeting. So Trump sat him down at a table and he asked them all to praise him, for all of his efforts. And so they did. They all praised him. They thanked him for his efforts, but they reminded him that a ceasefire is necessary, and then we can talk about terms after the ceasefire. But of course, Trump has kind of already rejected that. But before I get into more prognostication and guessing about how this will turn out, do you guys have anything you guys want to argue with any of my assumptions, or do you have a totally different perspective on things?
We should start with Greg since he's our guest today, I think.
Well, now you're just trying to be nice, and I don't know why you're trying to be nice today, but that's true. That's a good point.
Just one thought and one question. For you, Billy, what are your thoughts about what Trump could have offered? And I think Europe and Ukraine are foils because they're not truly independent actors, having no ability to bring military supplies themselves.
Yeah, so that's the thing, right? If Trump is going to just sell them weapons instead of giving them weapons, he thinks that's going to make him look better domestically, and that's good for him politically, to end the waste and the losing war. And instead, he might be able to, posture like he's supporting Ukraine, but he's not doing it in a stupid way, right? He's enriching himself from doing the right thing. So he could definitely play that angle into perpetuity and throughout the rest of his his term. But I suspect that there's other reasons for Trump wanting and consistently wanting to have amicable relations with Russia. Now, obviously, he has shipped javelins and he has continued the war, and he could definitely stop it. But I think there are political constraints, right? Politically speaking, you're just not free to do whatever. You're not a one-man monarch. You're constrained. And so, but he has shown, consistently that he's interested in having good relations with Russia. And I think the reason for that is because, and he's always said this since his first term, was it's stupid to drive Russia towards China. And in our upcoming confrontation with China, we would like to have Russia either neutral or on our side. And so I think, and he said this. He just said this. I think he said this on Friday that he thinks it's possible that Russia doesn't need to be an ally of China. He's not sure that we could win Russia over, but he thinks it's possible, and that definitely is part of the impetus of why he has prioritized consistently putting some political capital into maintaining good, better relations with Russia than, the rest of the establishment really seems like they want to do. But, okay. And as far as framework, because you asked me what specifically are the things that are acceptable to Russia that he's offering. And that is a good question. I think number one, it's like removing the Ukrainian troops from the security defensive belt in the Donbass area that's still there. And I think Russia would be more than happy if they didn't have to, fight for every square inch of that. So if the United States could force Ukrainian troops to leave, I think that would be a big concession that Russia would then, offer their own kinds of concessions. So we're hearing different things, right? We're hearing that the Europe would like to put boots on the ground in Ukraine to keep the peace. And then, and of course, Russia does not want a Minsk 3.0. They don't want to allow Ukraine just to rebuild their military and then, try again in 5 years. That's not going to work for Russia. And so any kind of agreement is going to have to preclude that as an option. And so, the question is Trump going to be willing? And then secondly, if he is willing, will he be able to force Ukraine and Europe into a legitimate peace that they cannot subordinate and that is acceptable to Russia? And so I think due to the Russian military advances and the inevitability anyway of Russia's victory, that, the Ukraine and the EU can be pressured into conceding, giving these concessions that are going to be necessary. Obviously, right now, they don't seem that they're ready. They're talking about a ceasefire and all this stuff. But I think a deal is possible. And I think that Trump is prioritizing his relationship with Russia over his relationship with the EU. Like, it's more important to him to have a good relationship with Russia than to, support Ukrainian sovereignty. And that's I use that word risibly. Like, I'm not being a genuine when I'm saying support. That's just what he would call it, right? So he doesn't care about Ukrainian sovereignty, and he doesn't care about the European Union. He's, both of those things are in Trump's minds are less important than maintaining a good relationship with Russia and trying to peel Russia away from China. And also to that end, there's a bunch of deals, right? So Trump wants to probably enrich his family personally. Trump probably wants to negotiate all kinds of trade deals with the Arctic, with Russian resources, with, accessing Russian energy. And then we have, lastly, I'm sorry, I'm long-winded here, is the his own, personal aggrandizement. I think that's a word, where he wants the Nobel Peace Prize, right? And so he sees that, the EU and Ukraine are the obstacles to Trump getting the Peace Prize, which he's deserved because he's already stopped 6 fucking wars. Now he's going to stop the 7th. And once that happens, he better get his fucking Peace Prize. And everybody better worship Trump as the best Lord and Savior in the history of the known universe. Like, that is very important to Trump. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Carlo.
So go ahead, Carl.
When is a surrender made you eligible for a peace prize? Because it's not Ukraine that's surrendering. It's the United States that's surrendering. It's not EU that's surrendering. It's the U.S. that's surrendering. When has that been a tool for the peace prize? Listen, this meeting, the way it went down, and the subsequent meeting on Monday is obvious. It's the fucking Epstein effect. It's the Epstein effect. We haven't had the National Guard here in Washington since the murder of Martin Luther King. That's a long time ago. That's the Epstein effect. And Stephen Miller stays up late at night coming up with different ways to take the fact away from Trump that he did it little girls. That's what this is about. If Trump wanted to end the war in Ukraine, he could simply stop sending the weapons. Yeah. He's under no obligation to send even the remnants of the money that's there. It's all getting stolen anyway. It's not going into anything. And the deal is, I shouldn't have. Is that, look? I have other things. I have so many things going on, but we should not. This thing about the Epstein deal. All right, you don't think the Russians have information on Epstein and what went down there? Listen, there's plenty of ex-Russian oligarchs that went to Epstein's Island. I can guarantee you that. It wasn't just Americans. It was a global thing. And it's not above the Mossad to hold that over Trump's head, given what they would want.
That's an interesting angle.
If you could stop the deal with Ukraine, or where we are squandering a lot of money, that could fucking go to Israel. Then you can concentrate on Israel. Fuck China right now. It's like this has nothing to do with serious negotiations. All it has to do with is is uh, making sure that Trump doesn't get called out on the fact that he diddled little girls. If you didn't notice the expressions on his face and the comments he made lately when Epstein's name was brought up, he doesn't go to bed at night worrying about the solving the problem in Ukraine. He doesn't worry about that at all, much less Gaza. He's worried about his own reputation. You want to talk about his rank and file? They all have children.
Okay, no, that's an interesting perspective, and yeah, so the influence of the whole Epstein thing on these events. So you think it's a prime influence, and I'm thinking it's maybe a minor one. But Ian, what are your thoughts?
I have to agree, it's probably minor. I mean, there's dots.
You're cutting out right when it's your turn. When it's your turn, you're cutting out. That's awful. Okay, so
yeah, I mean,
go ahead, Greg.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Ian,
The screen blanked out. Can you? Hello?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
You're
My
back.
connection went funky for a minute there. So as I was saying, I mean, I don't know what the effect of wanting to shift to the Middle East is. I mean, I think it's too early to say. I mean, I was telling everybody in the previous shows, I think there's a desire to shift to Iran, which still also affects Russia. So it's complicated. I think it's too early to go beyond speculation on that point. But I don't think, I do disagree with Carlo about it being a defeat for the USA. I mean, we might say, yeah, it is a defeat, but and I think optics-wise, if it was Biden or Kamala Harris in office, it would be very hard to spin it as anything but a defeat, because their whole platform was, Ukraine, no matter what, unconditional support to, for however long it takes. And then backpedaling on that is bad. But when you have a new president from the opposing party in office who says, well, it's Johnson's war, not Nixon's war, he has some free rein to do it. Now Nixon made the mistake of making it Johnson's war, Nixon's war. And I think if Trump does not have a resolution to Ukraine by the end of the year, 12 months after he's taken office, then it is going to be Trump's war. But if he cleans it up before then, he can spin it as a personal victory for him, and it's not necessarily a defeat for USA. Because if you think of what everybody, including myself, was saying in 2021, who would be the winners and losers of a war in Ukraine, USA is one of the winners because it deindustrializes the European Union, and it breaks up the whole idea of a European partnership, between Russia and Western Europe, because that would be an economic and political bloc stronger than the USA and stronger than China. Actually, it'd just be the strongest because there's nothing that can match Western Europe's farmland and population, 700 million people, and just how industrially built up they are. But they're an importer economy without colonies or without somebody, giving them resources on the cheap. It's an empty factory with no electricity. And Russia has kind of the opposite problem. They have. Russia is the top, has the largest population in Europe. That's true. But per square kilometer, it's the least populated European country, and it's also 60% permafrost. So they don't have, per capita. They're far below their weight. They're far, far, far below their weight in farmland, And the problem with resources, I mean, resources sound great, but you have to spend money to exploit them. And also, it's not a great basis for an economy. You know, ask Africa about that. Even if you're not controlled by foreign investors, it's hard to be particularly successful just on raw resources alone, because you can't flood the market because you'll crash the prices, and you know, putting in a little doesn't make you rich. So you got these two economies. If they actually put aside their differences, like they kind of were, and what Putin, the German file, was really hoping for with the Nord Stream project, was for all those past historical grudges between Germany and Russia, and Britain and Russia, and France and Russia, you know, all that to be put aside, and there's just economic cooperation that's in the toilet, you know. And the biggest loser is the European Union, you know, because you know, this is in the European Union. It's not, Ukraine is obviously not in the European Union, but it is in Europe. It's like Yugoslavia, Serbia. It's in their backyard. You would expect the European Union to be a regional leader in either preventing a war, or, you know, at least down talking that war, you know, de-escalating that war. You'd expect Macron, who's it? It's not Schultz. Is it still Schultz? No, it's not Schultz. Who replaced? I can't remember his name. Merz. Yeah. So, you know, they're and they're not. They completely surrendered all political control to the USA. I mean, in part because of physical necessity, because the USA is, you know, uncontested in weapons and satellites and all this stuff Ukraine needed for the war effort. So the Europe, you know, themselves chose to take. I mean, they didn't have to. That was just a path. That was just that's the fastest way to get what they want, was letting Biden have the front seat, and they did that. Now it's not Biden in the front seat anymore, but they're already sitting in the back seat, and there's really no way to reverse that. That's why you have those ridiculous photos from the White House meeting where that whole gaggle, like I don't even remember how many, there was like 10 of them, you know, all these guys, you know, all these world leaders, as they call themselves, sitting, you know, in the hallway, like school children who got called to the principal's office, like they were waiting in the hallway. I mean, it's embarrassing. And then they're all sitting in Trump's office with him like he's the school principal. He's telling them what to do. It looked really ridiculous. At the same time, Trump is really trying to play the mediator, and I think that's what slowed down the process, because the USA is not a mediator, it's a participant. If they were it's just like in the Korean War is actually shaping up to be a fairly good historical example. Not for the reasons that was cited, because everybody's like, oh, look, there was a ceasefire, you know, but we're not going to get a ceasefire this time, and those circumstances are going to be different, but still it's very similar, because you had the Soviet Union as a participant, though they were kind of pretending they were not a participant. That's also why in the ceasefire itself, the Soviet Union was not a signatory, which kind of makes sense, because publicly they were not involved in the war. So they couldn't sign it without admitting they were in the war, because they were, of course, in the war. But and China was, of course, publicly in the war. They dropped several, I don't remember the exact number, they dropped that. For them, what was for them a small army, but for us a big army in Korea, and pushed it to a stalemate. And the final, when the Korean War ended, 1953, was 1953. I want to say it's 1953 that it ended. The signatories of that ceasefire were North Korea, China, and the USA. And there's the USA. It's very funny. You see, you know, those photos. See an Asian guy, a North Korean guy, I forget his name, who's sitting there representing his country, and he's, you know, the American representative. Just represent, like, no one was even pretending that South Korea was a participant. No, they weren't even pretending. Like, it was just they didn't even have that pretense that South Korea was a player. And so we have that pretense now that Ukraine is a player, but that's facade is falling apart pretty quickly, because it's just the USA saying all this stuff. I think it's going to be, I think the main question, actually it's a two-part question, is how long Ukraine can hold out. Because we have to wonder why now, because, Trump dicked around for 7 months. Then why did he suddenly become in a hurry to, seriously try to push peace agreements? You even dropped the seat, like you mentioned, Bill. He dropped the ceasefire idea. So let's get a lasting peace agreement, like Putin and Lavrov and the Russians were saying all this time. I think there's some battlefield reality happening right now. Because apparently Ukraine has had in the first half of 2025 90,000 desertions, and about that many, if not much more, irretrievable losses, irrecoverable losses. So basically, those 30 or 40,000 people they conscript every month, half desert and the other half die in the first few weeks. I mean, that's not looking. I mean, maybe it's a Russian exaggeration. Maybe we're not. Maybe it's better than what it looks from the outside, but it doesn't look good. It's hard to think that's going to last long. And yes, it's the territorial gain is very incremental, but we can't treat, the battlefield as the playing board as, an equal set of squares where each square takes the same amount of effort to take. It's a winner take all situation, because if the Ukrainian armed forces collapse, like completely collapse, then it's just a winner takes all situation. It's not even a matter of fighting for Kharkiv and Odessa and Kyiv and all that. It's just if they collapse, then it's over. And they have to accept whatever terms Russia wants, because and so that's a very much a worst case. That's an absolute catastrophic scenario where they can't even negotiate. They just have to listen and do what they're told. And maybe there's some in the Pentagon, maybe some anticipation of that, and that's why they're nudging Trump to hurry.
Let me throw this out as a question.
Okay.
The people I watch and somewhat follow, and when I'm up to it, read, they're unanimously saying that someone got to Trump and finally explained the origins of the war in Ukraine. And that's the difference. That's making the difference now. It's finally gotten through the thickest head on the planet that the United States in the 2014 Maidan coup overthrew the elected government of Yanukovych, that there are 14,000 people, many Russian-speaking people in eastern Ukraine, had lost their lives being bombarded by the Ukrainian Nazis. To get blunt about it, that the accords were violated by the West, not by the Russians, like the Western press is presenting it, and that everybody in the West has been lied to, that doesn't have a point of stature, and that finally Trump, after all of these months, has finally figured out that it really is the U.S. that was behind everything, and now he's willing to make these concessions. You find any kind of, I mean, I listen to this from everyone, from people that are on Judge Napolitano to the McCorris to everyone. It's so stupid. I can't believe it's coming out of their mouths, because I usually find something of value in what they say. It's idiotic. What do you?
It seems very simplistic, and we all have our different opinions, right? So I think maybe Ian agrees with me, is that it's the primary driver is the military situation on the ground, is the primary driver of Trump's sudden change of course and his interests, newfound interest in achieving an agreement that Russia can agree with. You're suggesting it might have more to do with the Epstein, but I don't. I think what the narrative that you just explained, I don't agree with. I don't think that Trump suddenly got just this information that made him think, "Oh, really? Okay, well, let's do this then." I don't think it worked like that at all. But
yeah,
Greg,
I figured it's Billy Bob.
The other,
go ahead, Greg. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I mean, the other possibility I hear is the sanctions bind and tariffs bind Trump put himself in. That, he was bluffing, and then he had to back out of it because he didn't want to, start up another trade war.
Yeah, Mearsheimer talks about that. Mearsheimer talks about the bind he put himself in, and then he had to, prepare this summit in Alaska to get himself out of that bind. And now where does he go from there? Because, but it seems like where Trump wants to go from there, it does seem like he's at least giving lip service to the idea that he wants to offer Russia an agreement that they could accept. And so the problem then again becomes, convincing the Ukraine and the European Union to also say, yes, let's do that. Because I think, these governments could try and wait Trump out. Like if Trump didn't have 3 years left, I don't think there would ever have been a summit, because the EU could just say, no, we're going to, remain bets that the next president's going to be more on our side. But then again, that kind of diminishes my whole argument that it's really being driven by the military situation on the ground. And if it's driven by the military situation on the ground, what can the EU do? What can Ukraine do? You would think they would be more interested and giving more lip service to, yeah, I think we maybe should find some agreement. So ultimately, I think the EU and Ukraine are interested in politically forcing Trump not to make an agreement that's acceptable, and forcing Trump to remain involved, forcing the United States to remain involved, forcing the United States to continue the investment and even maybe ramp up the investment necessary to avoid a total, Ukrainian military collapse. But that just go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, there's also this narrative that Trump picks up whatever he's been persuasively told last. Right. So, the story is he watches Fox and he gets, his sycophants around him who talk to him. And, to some degree, maybe the Pentagon, right, influences him.
I don't know.
So, I'm a little. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think, especially people don't. I understand people don't like Trump, but I think people dislike Trump so much they think with their emotions rather than what's in front of them. I think Trump. You can say a lot of things about Trump. I will say he's very stubborn, and he's not an easy person to influence. Now, I think that's bad. He's got a completely backwards idea of what's going on, but at the same time, it more often turns into a strength than a weakness, because the White House and the government is full of people trying to worm their way into your trust and manipulate you to do what you want. I think Trump is just so stubborn. Even when someone's telling him the correct thing, he's just like, well, convince me. And, it took the Russians. I don't think he understands the origins of Ukraine, or I don't think he even understands. And I definitely don't think he understands how Yaroslav the Wise had to do with it. But I do think, as of what we need to do now, after many months of efforts, the Russians, just by being patient and, exercising solid diplomacy like you're supposed to, because diplomacy as a profession is taken much more seriously in Russia than it is in the USA and Anglo countries. They don't just put a businessman who's buddies with the president in as negotiator. Medinsky is the chief negotiator in Ukraine, but he's more, he doesn't really, as far as I know, have a diplomatic background, but he's almost an exception to the rule. But he is Ukrainian born person. He's a historian. So there's justifications for putting him as a negotiator. But typically a diplomat like Lavrov or their spokesperson, Maria Zakharova, went to higher education specifically to be a diplomat. So there's something they're very good at. And they did eventually convince Trump, well, you're right, that we need a peace agreement, not a ceasefire. And now once he's got that, and again, he's stubborn. So they convinced him. And now it's going to be really hard to unconvince him that it's a ceasefire is better than a peace agreement. And that's even a whole.
That'll be the interesting test, because I saw him starting to say ceasefire yesterday.
He's sloppy with words.
Yeah.
The general public, I shouldn't say the general public, the people who believe Russiagate, as far as I know, and I know some people who actually have a long history of negotiating deals with the old Russian oligarchs before they were tossed out by Putin, and still tries to do some work, mediation between, he's lawyering, mediation between Russia and Russian firms and American firms, and they hate Putin. And we argue with them because even though they know the chronology, or well, actually, a lot of them don't. They don't, because they don't watch Fox, but they watch CNN and MSNBC, and they haven't done any better job of talking about the true chronology of what's going in Ukraine. They will not even listen when you point it up. When you say, look, go look at this site, or look at this documentation. It's right there. It's right on the internet, and they won't. And even if they do, or even explain it to them, they don't respond in that way. Zelensky's a god. How can you? I mean, I don't. It's such a bad judge of character. So when it comes to Trump, here he is. He's standing in a, he's meeting in a closed door meeting for 3 hours with Putin and Lavrov, and he's got Marco Rubio next to him. And you don't think that Putin and Lavrov felt like they're holding all the cards, because they have information just like everybody else. The French Secret Service, MI6, they have plenty of information on Epstein. The Mossad, they got it. It's all out there. Anytime you want to spring that on Trump, and that'll get his ass kicked out. Believe me, that apparently that really bothers him. I've never seen the guy so bothered by that. He'll run with any racist fucking thing that idiot Miller can come down with, every one of them, and it doesn't bother him a bit. It doesn't, he can purge thousands of people out of their jobs and put them out on the street with these Doge things, which were so ill conceived and ill executed, just like the immigration thing. Of course, those ICE pussies aren't going to go after really dangerous criminals, because really dangerous criminals are really dangerous. Yeah, they're going to go to schools and haul school children out. Yeah, they're going to go to workplace sites and haul dishwashers out and cooks. Yeah, they're going to go to construction sites and haul those people off of construction sites who are putting up the purple line right around here. It's been in the fucking works for years. Yes.
Trump definitely.
This guy doesn't care anything about himself. Yeah. It has nothing to do with peace in Ukraine. Not a goddamn thing. Nobel Prize, notwithstanding, it doesn't. That's just something Miller came in and said, look, you can get a Nobel Prize if you settle the war that your country created. It's just
so Trump definitely sees the immigration thing as a big winner, and so he's trying to make a big spectacle with all the ICE raids and all the ICE things that he's doing. He thinks that's good for him politically, and I think that's why he's pushing that.
But it's not anymore. He's down in the polls dramatically for that shit.
Yeah, no, it's not helping him like he would like it to. I wanted to discuss some of the analysis that you see in the alternative media, going up into the summit on Friday. For instance, Brian Berletic, he was very cautious and worried, right? And other people had certain perspectives that just didn't seem that I had a problem with. They didn't seem appropriate, because ultimately I think Trump's rush to get this thing cobbled together resulted from Russian success, Russian economic success and Russian success on the battlefield. And because of that, it's forcing the West to engage and to, have their hair on fire about, oh, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And so the thing is, it's just a big victory. Like, this is a win for Russia. This is what is happening now with this push for peace by Trump, I believe, is resulting directly from Russia's victory, their ability to withstand, the not only the war but the economic attacks. Ian had a good point, right? Like the only purpose of this aggression towards Russia, moving NATO, de facto NATO, into Ukraine, right on Russia's borders, was not just to balkanize Russia. Sometimes I lose sight of that, and it's a great point Ian made earlier. It's also about severing the relationship between Europe and Russia. So that has, of course, succeeded, but what has failed is the efforts to turn Russia into what they did to Yugoslavia. So that's what's failed. That's what they realize they cannot do, and that's why they're changing course. So just like the Vietnam War was a failure, and imagine having all these analysts saying, "Oh, hey, Vietnam better watch out because the United States still sees Vietnam as an enemy, and they're not changing their strategic perspective as far as Vietnam being an enemy." I don't know. I think there's some parallels between.
We're more like France, looking for the U.S. to come in and take over.
What
trying to outsource it to Europe
now. What time
now.
frame are you talking about Vietnam in?
Well,
the 50s. Billy was thinking at the end.
Yeah, I was thinking at the end, and then so Greg wanted to really make my brain work extra hard and throw in a different analogy, which but hold on. So that, I don't know, that analogy doesn't fit as well as mine, I don't think, because France was handing it off to a much stronger power, whereas the United States is handing it off to a much weaker power that has much limited ability to do anything. Like handing it off to the U.S., the U.S. could win that war conceivably if they, had the political capital, didn't have the domestic dissent, and, invested the millions of lives into doing it. Like it could have been done. But handing it off to Europe just can't do it. And so I see a genuine shift in strategy and tactics with the United States approach to Russia. And it's a victory for Russia, and it's a win, and it's not anything that people should be worried about. It's not a worry. It's a victory. So I don't know. That's kind of the main thing that I wanted to point out with regards to some of the analysts. They're like, "Oh boy, Putin's going to go to Alaska, and he better watch out because the United States have to get him." So, and that's what I'm saying. Like the United States has realized they can't get him, and they're trying to negotiate their own, surrender, as far as, they're going to take their win severing the EU from Russia, but they're going to surrender their efforts to continue to destroy Russia's economy and to, balkanize Russia, to regime change Putin. I think that effort is going to be diminished a whole lot. And that is a victory for Russia that we should all appreciate and, thank Russian competence for. And then, we'll see what the U.S.'s plan is. I mean, is it Iran first? It very well could be Iran first, and China could remain on the back burner. Who's the guy that's calling all the shots at the Pentagon? He's a real anti-China hawk. Colby, right? Colby. So I think Colby is interested in, maintaining the status quo with Iran, and I'm thinking he's trying to get to China as soon as possible. But Trump has 3 more years-ish left, and I expect that, both Iran and China, they're going to try and figure these out before Trump leaves office. So any thoughts on that? So, I mean, I'm just kind of, I was watching the analysts and I was thinking to myself, that's just wrong. Like, why are you not, saying what a great victory this is for Russia? Why are you saying, "Oh, Russia better worry"? Like, there's no perspective that this is not a big win for Russia. Like, how is it not a win for Russia? I don't know. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I mean, I think Trump may be harboring these kind of thoughts, but the U.S. ruling class is not on board by and large. And I think when Trump says, well, Europe and Ukraine and Zelensky all have to agree, he really means the deep state, the foreign policy establishment, Congress, this whole opposition here that appears to still be unmovable. So, I mean, I think what Trump may be doing, and this is John Helmer's idea, is that they think Trump is better than any other American leaders and that he has these ideas and wishes. So they're going to facilitate him kind of outsourcing it to Europe, which is an advantage because, like you said, Europe's weaker and the logistics and everything will get more complicated. But this NATO taking over the buying has been being built up for a few months now. So that's the compromise. So the deep state and all the forces that are not willing to give up the campaign against Russia will get something. And, potentially even, like with the Brian Berletic view, Europe will be the proxy sending troops in eventually even. So that's an advantage we don't have.
I don't usually disagree with Greg, but Greg just said that Trump has thoughts. Trump doesn't have thoughts. He
likes Putin. I mean, there's something to this.
Well, he has what animals have. Yeah. He has instinct, and he thinks that's enough to go on. Well, I don't know. If I were to go on instinct myself, I'd be out in the street. I'd be somebody like living in Philadelphia on Kensington in Philadelphia, laying on the street, shooting up my arm. If I didn't have more going on in my head than what Trump has going on in his head. The guy doesn't have thoughts. The guy just has narcissistic responses. Just read your Greek mythology.
Why would Trump need to, if Trump just wants to pivot to China and start selling weapons to the European Union, what does he need Putin for? He doesn't need Putin. He doesn't need a summit on Friday. He doesn't need to be really nice to him. He doesn't need to say all these things about.
Trump doesn't want to pivot to China. Trump has no animosity, genuine animosity toward China at all. Trump doesn't know about China. Trump probably can't spell China. Don't give this guy too much credit. The guy's a moron. The guy's an idiot. I don't care what, little things, the doubts of these idiots, listen, the people we listen to on these shows, we watch on the other programs, they get the 100,000, 200,000 hits. They're all ex-intelligence and military. That's how they think. It's called epistemology. It's called how you can know the world. I don't have that. I was offered that, but I said, fuck you. Because obviously I had a little independence.
For everyone who has missed Carlo, this is Carlo's.
I have never seen another human being other than Trump bow down to authority so much. Greg hit the nail on the head. Whatever the last person in the room told Trump, he's likely to believe if he feels if his instinct tells him there's some advantage in it for him. And very often, ultimately, it's not because the person's hustling his ass. That's why he's seven failed companies. The guy couldn't even run a casino.
Can you let me have a discussion, Carlo?
The mafia made money with casinos.
Okay.
The guy's a fool.
So that's Greg and Ian. My question is, if Trump's only interest was to hand it off to Europe and extricate, the United States for whatever reason, he doesn't need Putin for that, does he?
I'm not saying it's his only interest. I agree. He wants things like, he wants to do reverse Kissinger. I think he likes Putin. I think he sees the war as dangerous, but he doesn't have the ability to do all that. So this is as good as he can get, is to get out from being the head of it and taking the blame when it goes bad. And if it doesn't go bad, he can take credit.
Yeah, I don't think anyone in the Trump administration actually likes Russia or even, they might. I think they respect Putin because Putin commands respect when he visited America, as opposed to the European gaggle who waited in the hallway like naughty school children. and at least they didn't call him Daddy this time, like in that interview. But I don't see any evidence to suggest that the America first foreign policy is even friendly to Russia. I don't think there's even much substance to the idea that Trump wants to enrich himself or enrich the American business class with trade with Russia up in the far north or wherever, because there's just not very much trade. I mean, even before the sanctions, there was almost no trade between Russia and the USA, and there's not much potential for trade. I mean, there's certain Russian exports that were so valuable, like some heavy oil for American refineries, some aviation parts, some titanium, some whatever. And those were things that were just important, couldn't be replaced, so they weren't cut, but those were negligible. And we were talking, I don't remember what the figure is like less than 10 billion a year, which is, I think it's actually less than that. It's pretty trivial amounts. I don't think I would like to see more cooperation between the USA and Russia, but I'm going to be realistic. There's very little potential for it. I don't think there's even going to be a particularly large shift in American attitude and the American stance towards Russia. I don't think there's necessarily even, I would like to agree with Greg and say there's a recognition of the danger of a confrontation that escalates up to and including nuclear war, but I'm not sure I'm not even sure risk management is something that is taken seriously.
I'm going to have to ask you to just be very succinct. Like, what is Trump after? Why did he call a meeting in Alaska? What is he doing? Carlo, not you.
I think
me. Go ahead.
I think we shouldn't underestimate the personal ambition for a Nobel Peace Prize. I think a lot of the criticism of Trump is unfounded, but that one is not. I think there is he really, 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 really wants a Nobel Peace Prize.
But that means he really needs peace.
Why does he need a Nobel Peace Prize? Because Obama got a Nobel Peace Prize.
But that means that he really needs peace. And you're saying he's not really interested in peace, or the administration isn't interested in peace.
Well, I didn't
say the appearance of trying to
they're
make
not
peace.
Interested in being friendly with Russia. You don't have to, and that's the main point here. You don't have to be friendly. The Russians don't even, want that. They would, of course, like to have friendly relations, but it's not.
Trump is not
crucial.
Black. He's orange. He's not.
Yeah,
black.
And the thing is,
orange.
like MK just said here,
Christ.
Obama didn't need peace for a Nobel Peace Prize either. What peace was there in the Obama administration? No,
He gave it to him before he was in office for more than a couple of months.
Yeah, so Trump just wants that feather in his cap to say, "Hey, look, I ended this terrible war in Ukraine
conferences every other week
personally,
now. Yeah.
So I should get my Nobel Peace Prize." I think there's a lot of that to it.
Okay. But you can't make that claim and statement and demand of the Nobel, whatever people, if you don't actually make peace. And so, then again, that's the question. So you're just saying, you're making the distinction between being friendly and being peaceful. But I think, I don't know. I don't see a distinction between the two. Obviously, if you're going to give Russia,
I'm not going to say USA and Russia are going to be best buddies.
If you're going to offer Russia a peace proposal that is acceptable to them, to me, by definition, you're being friendly with them. I don't know what your distinction is between not being friendly.
I think there's a difference between not fighting. There's a very large. You can be unfriendly to someone and not have them as an enemy either. I don't think those are two I don't think it's binary.
We end all our wars.
In the arena of international relations, being friendly is trading with countries, not sanctioning them, and not attacking them with your.
I'm not sure. I haven't even seen much indication that the sanctions are going away. I would personally like the sanctions go away because that would make my life a lot easier. But I I don't see the sanctions.
Well,
having
I've heard
Right, I
Russia
mean-
say that sanctions relief is part of the deal they're negotiating. That's what I've heard Russia say.
Well, it's we can't speculate, and I think I meant to say this earlier in the show. I just got sidetracked, but which is easy to happen on the show. I'll be honest, but the face means very little in Russia, right? So it's a very results oriented culture, right? So they're not, America is much more about face, the position of strength, as they call it, is very, very important to at least have the appearance of being in a position of strength. That's crucial. So I think that actually makes it harder for us to speculate because that face means nothing, basically nothing in Russia. So they generally, like we saw this in the Cuban Missile Crisis, they said they withdrew from Cuba, we withdrew from Turkey, but they didn't. That was part of the deal. They wouldn't rub it in our faces. No one even knew that we had that was. Everybody just thought it was all about the Cuban, the Russian Soviet missiles.
So that's an
Cuba.
interesting parallel, and I think a lot of that is going on because I think Russia is talking to Trump and trying to facilitate how Trump can navigate his very difficult political circumstances, and the Russian government is willing to help him do that, and I think so. They're talking and they're working together to allow Trump to figure out a way to bring actual peace and to actually get across the finish line something that Russia could accept.
I'll just say
that's a genuine effort.
I'll just say the English language media and the Russian language media, it's almost like they're not talking about the same conflict. And so I think that's going to continue. There's going to be that concession to Trump that he can ramble on. What does he call that website? Truth Social. He can ramble. He can say whatever he wants in Truth Social, and no one's on the Russian side is. If he doesn't get too ridiculous about it, I guess they won't contradict his portrayal of what happened. And the concessions to Russia might not even be public. I mean, I think it'll be a lot harder to keep that stuff a secret than it was in 1963, was it? 1962? The Cuban Missile Crisis happened. I guess Carlo would know, but go ahead.
I want to bring up the Vietnam War again. Kissinger won the Nobel Peace Prize, true, but he wasn't president. Le Duc Tho, he won it with Le Duc Tho, the Vietnamese representative, who, being a honest man, turned it down. It's a Bob Dylan of his era. Of course, Kissinger and Nixon, they believed that Dien Bien Phu was an opportunity for the United States, along with most of the Washington establishment. And then when it became untenable for them, they proposed a peace plan. The man that bombed Kissinger, that bombed Hanoi on Christmas Eve, came up with a peace plan. It was all made up to get elected. It was a lie. But, Trump doesn't even have a Kissinger, though. Trump has just got assholes. He's got Miller and I don't know the names of these other dicks around him.
Marco Rubio is a statesman of epic proportions.
Kellogg, what a fool. And it's not. And so when he gets steered all in these directions, because he's very steerable, it's the only thing that seems to have knocked his socks off, to have knocked him out of his own unself-awareness. The guy's so unself-aware is when somebody brings up the Epstein files. I know it sounds like ludicrous to you, but it's brought many a government down.
Yeah. So I'm not satisfied with Ian's answers or explanations. I'm being very clear. So Trump is definitely giving the appearance that he really wants to come to a settlement that Russia can accept. Now, I think the questions that follow from that is Trump really trying to do that? And if he is, can he do that? And if he isn't really trying to do that, what is he really trying to do? So, Greg, you're with me. It sounds like that he's really trying to negotiate a peace settlement that is acceptable to Russia. We don't have to get into his motivations. I mean, we could differ. It could be Epstein. It could be China. It could be
here's the
situation. But you don't think that he can do it. You don't think there's the political capital to come against the establishment consensus and force that through. So it's an interesting array of opinions we have here on the best panel on YouTube and Facebook.
If Trump really cared, was like, I'm going to be friendly to Russia, I mean, well, the most logical step to being friendly to Russia would be to stop killing them, because despite all of the panic and hysteria and like, oh, Trump, did this and that and this, from hearing from European people on social media. I mean, he is, I think I'm not even exaggerating when I say that people in Western Europe hate Trump more than they hate Hitler.
But Ian, exaggerating. You're not addressing the issue.
Well, I am addressing the issue because he can.
Why is he starting this process? Why is he starting this process? I'm starting this process. You're pointing out that the process isn't completed yet, but he's starting the process. Why?
Well, I think you yourself said why, because the battlefield reality is that if the process doesn't start, then it's going to be forced on at some point.
So why start a process? Like, what's the answer to the battlefield reality? If he's not serious about the process, why start the process?
I never said that. I think you're confusing me with someone else on this panel. I never say he's not serious. I just said he's not friendly, and it's not, really. I think it's important distinction because you had under Biden. Yeah, I mean, Greg, I want to hear what you have to say, but let me say this.
Sure.
Under Biden, you had the rules-based world order. You had globalism, right? It was the exact, they themselves said it's about the collective West. That's the term they use consistently. Collective West, collective this, collective that. America first. I mean, the whole narrative. I know the whole narrative falls apart when it comes to Israel, but bear with me on this. It's America first, which, as the Trump administration defines it, is that not. This is their exact. I mean, I'm paraphrasing a little bit because I don't remember the exact quote, but this is exactly how they say it. It's not thinking in terms of the collective, but what is good for the United States and its interests, right? So that's good for Russia because when you're acting as a collective, that leads to all sorts of problems like Ukraine. But if the USA is just like, hey, what's in our interest, and our interests are not aligned with the protracted war in Ukraine that ends with failure. So it makes sense to try to cut a deal with Russia. It doesn't mean the America first people like Russia or respect.
Whatever. That's the meaningless. That's the meaningless thing.
Well, let me flesh that out.
Go ahead.
Let me flesh that out a little bit. The two of the last losses the U.S. had are in that context. We, gave up in Afghanistan and Vietnam and then proceeded to sanction them for years. So, we do that, stop the war, but still continue hostility.
I don't think exactly. I don't think anyone would say the USA is friendly to Afghanistan and the Taliban.
Right.
Covert military hostilities continue too. You can go back to Vietnam again. Here you have Johnson, Lyndon Johnson. You want to talk about a hard-nosed politician? Here's a guy that killed his competition on it when back in Texas. He gives up the presidency to the Kamala Harris of his time, Hubert Humphrey.
Mm-hmm.
Hubert Humphrey's going to run against Nixon. That's the only reason Nixon got elected. And why was that? Because of the Tet Offensive. Because the Tet Offensive was so effective. Now, I've listened to all these pundits. We got out of Vietnam. It's just the polar opposite of what's going on in Ukraine. We got out of Vietnam because we were the only force holding the Viet Minh and the Viet Cong back. The South Vietnamese, they're just like the Putin government. They're just taking money, taking bribes. But if we pull out of say we're pulling out, we got to be careful about this. Say we're pulling out of Ukraine or come to some peace treaty, the United States is not going to stop supporting the opposition to Russia in Ukraine. That's the bottom line. It's not going
Or
to stop.
surrounding
We're
Russia.
doing it in Georgia right now as we
Right.
speak. Armenia, Azerbaijan, that's all that is, even though it's a wide
Finland.
spectrum. I mean, all over the place. Even Venezuela. I mean, it's just they're not going to stop.
But so Ian made the statement. He said that if Trump really wanted to make peace with Russia, he would just make peace. And I'm saying that that's a process, and he's initiated that process, and he's working towards that process. Yeah, he didn't just stop cold turkey, and I think that's because there's the reality of certain political constraints, right? He's got to.
Well, what political constraints? Because it does not require. I mean, to pull out crazy stuff like pulling out of NATO require congressional approval now that they Trump approved NATO. But to end the military aid, Trump can do that with an executive order. And Carlos said, I actually agree with Carlo here because he brought up that, I mean, they're opposing Russia everywhere else. And there's no evidence they'll stop undermining Russia and Ukraine. Just because they're going to officially end the war doesn't mean they're going to stop undermining Russia and Ukraine. So on what basis? I mean, you say it's meaningless, but I think it's meaningful to say, because like I said, not being in open hostilities isn't the same as being a friend. If they're covertly, and sometimes just not even covertly, just openly opposing Russian interests in multiple places around Russia. We're not even talking about like Venezuela. Okay, Venezuela, I can understand there might be some controversy because it's closer to the USA than to Russia, but what about Georgia and Azerbaijan and Armenia? Like Carlos said, how can we sit there and say with the USA actively working against Russian interests in those? And as these negotiations about Ukraine continue, that stuff, they're doing a NATO exercises in Armenia, they're doing all this other shit in countries adjacent to Russia. How can we sit there and say, well, it means there's going to be some huge shift in policy towards Russia? Well, I don't see that. There's not really any basis.
Well, okay, so you're not okay. So you don't see an effort to shift policy towards Russia. I mean, isn't that? I mean, so what happened on Friday? What happened on Monday? Isn't there going to be a trilateral meeting coming up? Like, what is the point of that? If it's not to signimately change your approach towards Russia,
saying this one battle doesn't mean the war. I mean, pulling out of one battle doesn't mean the war is over. I think that's really what it boils down to. Because Ukraine doesn't. Because there is a return on investment, right? When you invest, right? And so when we talk about return on investment, we say, okay, so there's this factory and it has 4 workers. Well, I can increase that shift to 8 workers to double productivity. But if I add 10 workers, then it's too many. And then there's a point where you're actually investment is just a waste because it's just money going down the drain. It's not doing anything. I mean, Ukraine's definitely hit that point, because in the beginning in 2022, there was definitely, I could see a positive return on investment. Now it's just money down the drain where, if you're talking about 10-1 casualties and it's literally, and you're just weapons you send are immediately destroyed.
Oh, and I think that's just like when the U.S. lost in Vietnam, it's a big loss for the United States. They poured all this money, lead and treasure in investing in.
But I mean, would you say
Russia, and they failed and they lost, and so now they're negotiating how to move forward. They're going to cut their losses.
But ending the Vietnam Democrats ending. I mean, I think even the Democrats in 1973, 1976 were different Democrats than they are now. At least, there's some
for sure,
definitely some, even there. I mean, can you say that Vietnam was a war against the Soviet Union? Was a proxy war to undermine, that country adjacent to China and the Soviet Union in their backyard. Can we say, because the USA pulled out of Vietnam, they were friendly towards the Soviet? I mean, they were friendly with China because Nixon did engineer the Soviet Sino-Soviet split, but that doesn't mean they were friendly or something. Because they pulled out of Vietnam, they're now friendly to communism and friendly to the Soviet Union. Well, no, of course not. It just meant they lost, and that's all it meant. The Vietnam project was over. The Cold War was not over with Vietnam.
But so you're saying the Ukraine project is over?
I think the Ukraine
that
project
front
is
is
running its
dead-ending.
course. It's dead ending. That's a good way
Okay,
to put
well,
it.
what's all this talk about handing it to Europe and selling Europe all of our weapons to keep it going?
Military-industrial complex.
And
Yeah, we're
Europe's
gonna have to see,
continued devotion to it.
because if the USA, because here's the thing, so if the USA just washes its hands of the matter and dumps it on the EU and the UK, yeah, I think they're going to. I think that without the USA, it's not going to last more than a few months. But I might be mistaken. I might be wrong. I know that Europe lovers assure me that they don't need the USA. It's actually Europe doing all the work. That's what they tell. That's what they say. Oh, it's Europe doing all the work. It's just the USA just taking credit for it. That's what I hear from them. Even before Trump took office, it's not just Trump derangement syndrome. Even during Biden's term, there's it's Europe doing all the work. USA is just helping a little bit. I don't think that's true. But I think either way, the USA wins, right? So if the USA somehow agree, because I think that's what's going to end up, right? Even if Europe and Ukraine don't agree with whatever Trump proposes, but Russia and the USA reach some agreement on Ukraine and other trade and political issues, because I think that's not, because I think Ukraine, when Lavrov and Putin and little Rubio and Trump meet, they talk about things besides Ukraine. I don't think it's just Ukraine. I think they talk about Iran. I think they talk about South America. I think they talk about Africa. I think, at least if they're smart, I can't be a fly in the wall for those conversations. I think there's other things that come up. But the end result is, if Russia and the USA reach some agreement that results in the USA withdrawing from Ukraine, then it doesn't matter what happens after that, because either way, Europe is weakened. So if Europe drags it out for another year before it collapses, well, good for the USA. If it lasts a month and then there's a collapse, it doesn't matter. The outcome, it's because that's the benefit to washing your hands of the matter. If it lasts a month or a year, it doesn't matter at that point.
So right now, Trump, again, he seems genuinely interested in allowing and putting forth a proposal that is acceptable to Putin, and then trying to force Ukraine and the EU to agree to something. I think
that's true.
That Putin could agree to. Now, so the question is, does he have the political capacity to do that, or will that effort fail? And then the next question is, if that effort fails, who is the United States going to blame? Are they going to blame Putin? Are they going to blame the EU and Zelensky? Because I think you're right. The U.S. will leave. Like if Trump can't get an agreement, he said, if you guys can't find a way to make an agreement, that's fine, because we're moving on, and you guys can figure it out. And he said, I will sell. He said he sold the European Union weapons, but
it's like watching someone else play a video game, right? You kind of wish you could jump in and play it for him, but you can't. It's like, all right, not even, seriously, because Trump is in a perfect position to say that, right? If Europe turns him down, he could say, well, you know what? I put the ball in your court and you dropped it. That's on you. Yeah, I'm out.
But Europe wants Trump to blame Putin. Europe wants Trump to say, hey, we can't have. Go ahead. Sorry.
Can I finish? Right. I was going to say, I think it's possible, even likely, that Europe will begrudgingly accept. I'm sure they'll haggle, but I think it's likely at this point they will accept what Trump says, and the reason why that's a guess, but the reason why I think that is because the gaggle showed up to Washington. Because if I was again, it's watching someone else play a video game. If I was Macron, or if I was Ursula, the gynecologist, the unelected gynecologist, I would say, you know what, Trump, Ukraine represents the free world. It's we have the moral obligation to support them to the bitter end, whatever it takes. We're not even going to entertain your terrible idea to give this dictator this evil, literally worse than Hitler dictator what he wants, we're not even going to entertain it. That's what if I had decided I wanted to stay in Ukraine, that's what I would do, right? Because by meekly going into his office like a school child, that's so bad. But by doing that, I think they realize, well, crap. The reality is we do not have the means to continue the war without the USA. That's my guess for why they did. Because it's humiliating. I mean, I would be so humiliated if I was one of those guys sitting in Trump's office, which I almost misspoke as Putin, but it's almost the same. You know, it's like accepting Putin's terms. It's almost as bad as sitting in Putin's office meekly letting him tell you what's going on. You know, it's just so bad. I think that's not something they did lightly. It's desperation. They realize, well, crap, without the USA, this is not going anywhere. That's what I think.
But van der Leyen and the Europeans now have a little bit of a wedge against Trump, because I'll bet you, well, you know that they're never going to pay that $600 billion. They
don't have $600 billion.
That was just she was not humbled by that. That was not humiliating. And the other I can't remember the other half of that deal. The United States is never going to see any of that. So she's got this leverage. Well, you know,
it's not leverage. I mean, because here's the thing:
it is leverage, because if it goes public, Trump will look weak.
Why would he look weak?
What's 600 billion?
600 billion plus some other aspect. When she sat down with Trump, she promised some other part of the deal. I think it was bigger than the 600 billion.
The trade deal you're talking about.
Yeah, it's there. It was public.
Now, here's the thing, Carlos. So I think this really shows the difference between the EU and the USA, because $600 billion in the US is not, it's not an amount to sneeze at, but it's money we could print. And maybe the price of a Starbucks coffee will go up a little bit. Maybe it'll be $8 instead of $7.50 or whatever they're charging. But it can be done. The European Union cannot pull 600 billion euros out of their ass. They can't, because it's not the USA. They can't just have printing machines go.
Right.
So, and that really I think that really undercuts their narrative, because their whole narrative is like, oh, it's Europe doing this and the USA is just tagging along. Well, it kind of shows the USA can, if the USA wanted to, they could drag this out, right? They could. Right, the USA could just say, fuck it, we're going to print another $1 trillion. We're going to, send another $1,000
trillion debt.
Right, they can do it. $1 trillion, they could do it. They could, and send another 1,000 tanks or whatever. They could, but the European Union can't. The European Union can't.
But that's why Trump accepting it just points him up as a fool he is. Go ahead, Billy Bob. Sorry.
Well, Europe has been ramping up their defense spending. I saw it's up to how it was in the 1980s.
Well, they're trying, but the problem is, increasing. And I see this on like, cause I have a Quora page, and it's where most of my, this is where I'm writing, because I see these people who write and they act like GDP. I mean, it's like nobody knows what the hell GDP even means. Like, they act like it's they literally act like it's a pile of money, and the government can just say, what, I'm going to take 10% of GDP. It doesn't work that way. It's every single person who buys a haircut or a coffee or, buys some Bitcoin, online, every single person, right. Or gets a divorce, has a broken leg, gets, anything goes to your GDP, right? It doesn't mean, And we also have to think that the European tax burden is like pretty much double what is in the USA, because the USA can get part of it is because the tax burden is lower, because it is like 50-60% of your income. I mean, and that's really significant, because I'm not saying this bad. I don't want people to get offended here. That is true. 50-60% of your income is going to taxes already, because of their social, which I'm not dinging on, their healthcare and their welfare systems, their social safety nets, all that stuff. But they're saying, hey, guess what? We're increasing your tax burden another 10%. So we buy some tanks from the USA. Well, it's not happening. You can't. when you already choked, wrung that towel dry, there's nothing left. You get a couple more drops out of it, but you can't just, you can't just say, hey, we're increasing defense spending from 3%. I mean, the USA could, right? The USA could, Russia could. And the reason why Russia can is because at low tax base, you can say, you know what, we're gonna spend 6% of GDP on military this year. They can do that. They can get away with it. The USA can say, you know what, we normally spend 4%. We're going to spend 5% or 6%. USA can do that. Europe cannot. I'm telling you guys, Europe cannot. Anybody who tries serious, I think they're just lying when they say they are, because they just want to say what appeases Trump. But any European country that seriously tries to reach the 5% target is just going to, maybe Estonia can get away with it because it's not a real country.
Yeah, no, they've given lip service that that's what they're going to do, and they've given all the. Yeah, you might be right. So, Greg, it sounds like me and Ian are in agreement that Trump will be able to force Ukraine and EU to capitulate. Now, when I say capitulate, of course, I mean simply agreeing to a peace deal that is also acceptable to Russia. Now, I'm making an assumption that Russia is only going to accept a peace deal that is good for them. Like, I don't believe that Russia is so naive that they're going to accept a Minsk III. So I have faith and I trust that the Russian government, after they have put, hundreds of thousands of lives on the line, are not interested in any peace deal that is not going to work for them. And so anything that they end up agreeing to, I am going to say is a good deal. And I don't have any worry at all that they're going to end up doing Minsk III. But given that reality that Russia will only accept a good deal, Putin is only going to be offering a deal that Russia can accept, and Trump is going to try and force the Ukraine and the EU to accept this deal. You don't think a deal can be reached, Greg?
Well, I don't think the EU is prepared to give up yet. I don't think they have any alternative imperialist development plans. They're pushed out of Africa. Asia's not really open. Latin America's not available to them. So I think they've really invested a lot in this. Plus, they've turned, Putin into Hitler, and this is a civilizational struggle for them. So I don't know if they can change gears or even incline to yet.
Well, Ian touched upon an important point too, and that is BRICS and de-dollarization. That's another thing that's driving the U.S. hard. Even if Trump believes that Spain is part of BRICS, that's okay. He came up with raw earths because somebody at 315 told him that Russia was rich in rare earths, and he heard it as raw. And at 330, he talked about the Russian raw earth. So there are things, de-dollarization that'll have an effect on the peace talks that we're talking here, because Russia's not going to give up its alliance with China and the other BRICS countries. It's not going to happen. I mean, Brazil is kind of leading the way with BRICS right now, so it gets just firmer and firmer. The India is talking directly to China now. So I don't really see a peace. I don't really see a peace treaty of any sort coming out of negotiations with Trump.
Ian, so it's like you kind of agree with me, right? That Trump is going to offer a respectable deal that Russia can approve, and the EU and Ukraine are going to be forced to join on. Again, I don't see. That's the only solution to the military reality on the ground. There's no other solution to the military reality unless the United States can force the EU and Ukraine to agree to terms that are acceptable to Russia.
Well, do you remember 2 years ago on this show, I told you guys that this was probably going to end in summer 2025, because that's what I was saying on this show 2 years ago, and this was before I
do.
even imagined. I even wrote a post before the election saying Harris was going to win. I was like totally wrong. Trump won. But even not, it's not because I thought, Putinist, Kremlin agent Trump was going to come in. I was just like, it's just the reality on the battlefield was going to be the USA was going to have to make a deal with Russia or be forced to make a deal with Russia in summer 2025. And I think that's coming true. And regardless, and I think there's some, and I don't think, I don't remember who said it just now, but I apologize. So somebody was saying that he was facing institutional pressure for that. We can't know, but I don't necessarily agree with that because it's just the reality. Even the deep state, if you will, even just the institutions in the USA are realizing, well, there's no return when we're just sending weapons to Ukraine and they're being destroyed. we need those elsewhere. There's other irons in the fire. We need to deal with Greater Israel. We need to deal with the Indo-Pacific. We can't just we can't just take our $1 billion weapons and throw them straight into the wood chipper.
So what's the last month of summer?
Well, the last month of summer is, I guess,
September 21st is the beginning of August.
Okay, thank you. I had no idea.
Because I have said too, like I've come to the conclusion that I think by the end of September we'll have this peace agreement, and that the EU and Ukraine and Russia and the United States will be on board, and they're going to have the fighting will come to an end by the end of September. And it's going to be on terms, of course, that Russia can approve, and we should be all happy when that happens. Even though, of course, what real difference does it make with the overall efforts by the West to maintain their, global hegemony? So I think that's where maybe you were arguing with me at the beginning, the middle of the program, Ian, was you're like, well, what difference does it make? The United States will still see Russia as an enemy. And I get that, but I'm just, I'm talking, on a totally different level than the overall picture. I'm just saying with regards to the war in Ukraine, that's a huge victory for Russia. And it's going to involve, again, a peace agreement, which I say will be by the end of September, will involve sanctions relief. It'll involve big trade deals that you say aren't really possible. And I'm not sure I'm persuaded by that. There's a lot of resources to exploit. There's a lot of people in the West that want to invest. Not to mention, we've got the Arctic is opening up more resources plus trade routes. And so there's a lot of business that can be done. And I think that's all what Trump's about, and that's what Trump is going to use as as leverage to extract other kinds of concessions from Russia. They're going to be involved in horse racing. And again,
I don't think because economic cooperation requires some economic interest. So like Britain, so post-colonial Britain, right? They gave up their colonies after World War II. And then it's like, well, shit, what we're going to do? It's just an island. So it's just kind of an island for 30 years. And then the breakup of the Soviet Union was a godsend for Britain, because there was a huge, there was just billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars in Soviet infrastructure that was just looted, privatized and looted, scrapped, sold for scrap metal. And then those oligarchs, the red directors, and just all these, both the people in the Communist Party who went capitalist and just looted the system they were supposed to be the keeper of. And, it's just all these, the factory man, all these people who were in the right place at the right time to loot the system in Soviet Russia, and of course other Soviet countries as well. They had all this money, and Britain, of course, were also master manipulators, and they were just like, hey, they were the guys like, hey, you can park your money here. You can buy our real estate, right? You can buy, $1 million, billion pound, whatever, apartments in London. You can park your money in our banks. And so that's a huge business boom for Britain. And of course, that's why they don't admit it. That's why it's so bitter when Now, Putin was, of course, Yeltsin's guy. He did, I wouldn't call it a revolution against Yeltsin. He didn't put Yeltsin in prison. He really did very little to even go after Yeltsin's people. But it was an end of the gravy train for the most part.
Right.
But so my point, and I bring that up, is because there's no potential gravy train here, right? So they can have. Go ahead, Greg. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is what drives it, is to return to the golden years of Yeltsin. I think that's what the animating vision is here.
And that's what they
So,
tried.
especially because so much of the economy has been renationalized, they see a potential replay with the right leadership in Russia.
So but at this point, it's just a concession. It's just like, well, you know what? It didn't work. This round did not work. We can try again next time,
Besides, what's Russia going to trade with the U.S. after what the U.S. has done that's of any consequence? And people talk about the Arctic. That doesn't just involve the U.S. and Russia. It doesn't involve the U.S. really at all. The U.S. has no border on the Arctic. It's going to involve every fucking country in the world, because everybody's going to want to everybody's going to want to do commerce.
I'll just say the Russians themselves don't think like, oh, we're going to have $1 trillion in business with the USA. No one Russia's saying that. I mean, I think we're just talking about geopolitically. Russia likes, it's kind of, I mean, it's as counterintuitive as it is. The USA's reputation, and the Russians watching this show can feel free to chime in and disagree with me, but USA's reputation in Russia is about the same as it was at the beginning of the war. They just say, okay, USA is very money oriented, very profit oriented, very unscrupulous, and very self-interested. And that's basically the same. They're like, and I think the USA, I think also the Russia, considers itself a great power, even in periods of time when they weren't exactly a great power, right? Its identity is very important to them. So they and also just culturally, there's they look at American culture, look at Mark Twain, they look at Hollywood movies, and they say, okay, I can see, these guys are similar to us in a lot of ways. So there's cultural affinity with the USA, and also there's less betrayal, because they really had something going with Germany for a minute, right? Because Germans are, they're different from Slavs. Obviously, they're different people, but I think there's in a lot of ways more similarities between Germans and Russians than with Americans and Russians. But so they're neighbors, and there's like, oh well, hey, we're going to have this big era of cooperation with the European Union, which is led by Germany and France. And then there was just this, there was this very big sense of disappointment and betrayal. And also it's because there's just the behavior of companies also, because I'll be honest, as the guy who's been in Russia for pretty much the whole duration of the war, because I've been here since summer 2022 is when I moved here and stayed here. I've seen pretty much everything. The American representation in the Russian economy is basically the same. I mean, some like McDonald's, some companies sold their assets, but they didn't try to poison the well, right? There was no well poisoning. There's American companies who pulled out and said, hey, you know what? Here's what we're going to politely hand over all of our assets to Russian management. And we're going to and they'll even sign it. And they very politely signed these agreements, and there's even a buyback option. Like McDonald's is like, hey, we might want to come back to the Russian economy. It was very polite. There wasn't any poisoning wells. But with European companies, European car manufacturers, European, like IKEA furniture manufacturers, it was very scorched earth. They went scorched earth. They were just like, no, we're not just leaving the Russian economy. We're going to try to destroy everything that we had, right? They really went out of their way. Like Renault, the French car company, they even started identifying VIN numbers for their cars bought by Russian people. So like they looked at their own customers, said, you know what, we're going to actually blacklist you, where you can't buy parts, even if you try to go to, you know, a parallel import. I mean, they really, really fanatically went out of their way to screw over Russian investors, Russian customers. So I just think emotionally and just, you know, just as far as a breach of trust, there's more betrayal there. So Europeans are not going to come back to the Russian market anywhere to the extent they were. Americans.
Well,
so, and that's, but alternatively, I'll say there's not like a huge potential for growth either, because it's like, where would the growth occur? Right. Russia, I mean, USA could maybe buy more oil from Russia. Maybe they could buy more plane parts, but they can't buy 10 times. You don't need that many plane parts. You don't need that much more oil. You can't just say, oh no, we're good. You know, maybe we'll even double it. We'll even double our Russian imports. So it's 20 billion instead of 10 billion. It's still not a lot, right? It's not going to usher. It's not, and I wouldn't even compare it to Nord Stream 2, right? So even if there was a period of Russian and American cooperation, like just like no war, no animosity, even if it's just its full potential, it wouldn't be what it would have been like with the European Union. So saying there's a huge potential for profit, I don't think it's true. So that's my point in that.
Okay.
If I'm making sense.
No, I mean, yeah, I get it. I mean, I don't know, you know, I don't know exactly what we're disagreeing on. I mean, I'm not making any concrete statement about, you know, the number of billions of dollars in an investment. But I know right now we're sanctioning Russia. Right now we are, you know, waging an economic war against them. And as part of this peace proposal, this peace process, that's going to change. And as part of that process, not only are we going to end our, you know, attacks on the country, but we are going to enter into agreements and trade. And so the capacity of that, I mean, you know, you could be right. Maybe it's not as big as I imagine, you know, with all of Russia's resources and the Arctic and all that. Okay, maybe.
The potential's big, but the terms aren't going to be to our liking.
Oh, well, and again, it's market economics. You can say, Russia has $1 trillion worth of lithium, or Russia has $1 trillion of nickel. Russia has $10 trillion worth of heavy oil. You can't just say the USA is going to buy, you know, $10 trillion worth of oil or nickel. You know, so again, it's just market constraints. You know, resources are overstated.
Well, I think clearly Trump Industries wants to, you know, get a real sweetheart kickback, and so I'm pretty sure that's.
I also think it's. I mean, that might be true. It might absolutely be true. I mean, the same with Ukraine. You know, Trump was going on and on for months about Ukraine's mineral wealth, and then I remember like there was this euphoria of a couple days. Then like 2-3 days after Trump made those statements, after the Zelensky meeting, actual people familiar with Ukraine stepped in and said, you know, there's really actually not a lot there. And it's also in competition with other sources of mineral wealth. It doesn't mean all those other countries, Canada, Russia, and all those other countries producing that mineral wealth are just going to stop producing it. There's not a lot to be said for that. So I'm not. Yeah. So my point is that Trump might get excited about it. Oh, well, there's all this mineral wealth in Russia or whatever, but there's not. It's not coming from an educated standpoint. So maybe you're right. Maybe Trump imagines that he's going to make, you know, his personal industries and his friends will make all this money, but it's not reality. It's just not.
No, that's what Lindsey Graham told him.
Yeah, I mean, and Lindsey Graham is, besides his being paid off by
absolutely
Israel, he's not. I wouldn't consider him a particularly educated person either. So
no, Lindsey Graham says that the United States has a button that can destroy the Russian economy. And if Putin refuses to agree to our trade terms, we will push that button and destroy their economy. So,
well, you know, someone should ask Lindsey Graham if that button to destroy the Russian economy is next to the button that would get him to visit the hurricane victims, you know, 3 hours drive from his house, for fuck's, which he still never visited, despite condemning Democrats. He didn't visit them. And people noticed that. You know?
What's really cool is how there's legislation saying that, you know, if you don't support the state of Israel, you don't get
right.
disaster
But
relief.
right. If you're a company, and it's almost worse than that, because it's the companies and nonprofits that facilitate the relief. If you're a trucking company or a nonprofit that facilitates relief to affected areas, well, we know you boycotted Israel, or you don't support Israel, so you're not going to get the money to facilitate. Those people are going to stay underwater with no.
We're gonna withhold your taxpayer money through FEMA, even if 100 of 9, many of them, of little Christian schoolgirls drown in a flood. We're not going to give you any relief money because of the situation.
It is like an occupied country.
There's a couple of things off topic, sort of, that I wanted to bring up, and that is Burkina Faso has now left the UN, and there is a not too much publicized attempted coup again against Burkina Faso, led by what's that country called? The United States, in conjunction with, of course, France, because the Burkina Faso and Niger and Mali used to be colonies of France. And it was 57 military vehicles laden with humanitarian aid for Burkina Faso, but underneath were weapons, a huge amount of weapons, and they caught it. There was and what was the pattern? The weapons were first seized, or actually first sold, out of an Eastern European country. Let me guess. Does that country begin with a U? Could that have been Ukraine?
Oh, wow.
Oh, yes. And where did weapons go? They went to Libya. Oh, Libya. Who calls that failed state? The Nobel Prize winner. The black man that won the Nobel Prize. And where did they go from there? They went to Togo. And then Togo, which shares a border with Burkina Faso, the trucks were organized there and sent in ostensibly to overthrow the Traoré government. And
Why did they leave the UN?
UN was involved. The UN wouldn't respond. There was nothing they would do about it. They wouldn't give them a platform to complain about it. Screw these people. The other thing I wanted to bring up, and this is what the Fort Bragg thing. Sean Harp, the journalist Sean Harp, has finally finished his book on drug smuggling and murder on U.S. Army bases. They're really dangerous places. They're so far more dangerous than even Chicago. It's hard to contemplate. There were 109 deaths, many of them homicides, many of them very suspicious also, none of which have been solved on Fort Bragg between 2020 and 2021. I mean, so really, the CIA and the U.S. military, the Army intelligence, they've been smuggling drugs ever since Lucky Luciano wound up in the Mediterranean, and I don't want to hear it from anybody else that that's not happening. If you haven't read Alfred McCoy, you're not an educated person. So I just want to say that.
I did want to clarify that Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, they left the economic community of West African states, but they did not leave the United Nations. So they left that organization, but they didn't leave the United Nations per se.
No.
Leaving the UN's unusual.
Has left the United Nations. Not Mali and Niger, no, not yet. Because they've tried to kill Traoré, and they try to kill him every day.
Well,
they got a new
Google AI says that
AI is wrong.
Continues to be a
guys,
member
so
of the
it's
UN.
almost 9 p.m. here, and my dog is losing my shit under my feet here.
Okay.
So are there any other thoughts we want to hit here?
Read Sean Harp's book.
Well, yeah, we can wrap up. I can always we always have next program to vent more. But
right. And I don't want to keep you guys. If you want to argue for another half hour, please do. But I got a few more minutes here. He's really
I don't know. I'm curious. I'm wanting to kind of just discuss how things are going to play out and what you guys think and why they're going to play out. And I feel like when I ask pointed questions, I get long, circuitous answers.
I can give a short answer to that. So I think what's going to happen, so Trump is going to make a conclusion. He's going to say, hey, this is going to be my take it or leave it deal. And Ukraine / Europe will either take it.
See, and that's what happens. He tries to give a succinct answer, and the interwebs won't let him. But yeah, that's too bad. So I know he has to go. He has things he's got to do. Sorry, Ian.
No, I cut out. Right as I was talking, I cut out. I was going to say it's going to be a binary outcome. Trump will make his ultimatum, and Europe and Ukraine will either take it or leave it, and that is going to be the crossroads. Can Europe and Ukraine survive without U.S. help, or will they realize they can't and accept whatever Trump's ultimatum is? I think that's your crossroads. That's your binary.
And you're saying that
outcome.
Putin and Russia are going to be on board with Trump's. They're gonna agree to Trump's ultimatum. Because if Russia doesn't agree with whatever Trump says, then the ultimatum is meaningless because Russia itself won't accept it, right?
The ultimatum will look like Russia's demands.
Well, it's very confusing because what Trump says seems to contradict what Russia says sometimes from looking at the media. But I think it's likely that Trump and Putin are on the same page at this point.
Yeah, and there's going to be a perception battle in the media to blame somebody if there is no agreement reached. And part of that media and perception battle is going to be to leverage for further concessions by Russia. So Ukraine is going to say no.
My point the whole show is that if there's no concession reached, then battlefield reality is going to set in. I would be astonished if Ukraine keeps fighting and doesn't accept some kind of peace deal, and they survive the winter. I will be astonished. And even if we're on this show next year and Ukraine kept fighting and is still here and didn't collapse, I will be the first to admit that I'm astonished, because I don't think Ukraine is going to survive. If Ukraine chooses to keep fighting with European support without American support, even with American support, if Trump, worst case scenario, Trump backpedaled and just said, you know what, okay, you guys are right, I'm going to keep unequivocally supporting Ukraine, that battlefield reality of they just don't have the men and they're just bleeding out is going to set in the winter. Yeah. Well, that's what I think.
Yeah, I mean, let's take the Iran Contra. It wasn't the usual suspects that supported the Contras. It was the Sultan of Brunei. Now I know that the amounts of money were trivial by comparison, but they were in the tens of millions of dollars. So it's not necessarily that the arms and money have to come through Europe, or be even identifiable as coming through the United States. I mean, they do this stuff with phonied up end user certificates all the fucking time. U.S. weapons turn up in places unsuspected, and it's just I think the war will still be going on in one form or another for the next few years.
Yeah, me too.
Well,
do you mean the war in Ukraine, or do you mean the Cold War in general?
Okay.
I don't think it's going to last a few more years. There's no way it's going to last a few more years. Yeah. They don't.
Ukrainians don't even have to fight it. There's enough crazed mercenaries out there.
No, there's not. I mean, if you look, you can. I mean, the mercenary numbers are pretty public. I mean, because the reality is that Ukraine is a finite. I mean, it's brutal to even talk about that. Ukraine is a finite male population, and about half of it, or more than about half of it, is dead or fled to the country or already enlisted in the military, and the other half are who didn't flee and aren't dead or in the military are in the doing some crucial role in the civilian economy. You can't just say, hey, all of all of our people working in factories, all of our people growing
if
food.
that's
are
not
gonna
an
go fight.
exaggeration. But I don't want to play Nostradamus here. One thing I want to say about Burkina Faso and where AI is wrong. If they didn't leave the UN, why have they thrown out the UN representative Burkina Faso?
What does
Made her
that
go
have to do
home.
with Ukraine?
Made her go home.
Well,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, we can fact check. I mean, anybody can go to Google and find out what's going on with their. I would have assumed that Google would tell me if they left recently the United Nations. That would be a big deal, one would assume. But Greg, did you have any final thoughts while we wrap up here?
I mean, do any countries leave the UN? Does that happen?
Yeah.
I'd never heard of that.
Sure they do.
Who's left the UN?
I think some of the Micronesia countries
I
over
don't
climate
think anyone
change
knows
have
where those
left.
countries are. But yeah.
But anyway, okay. So, but yes, I mean, we can fact check that. I'm not sure that they have left the UN. I think they did leave some agencies, which might have led to,
Who says I don't want to voice an international voice?
They don't have an office anymore for the UN.
I mean, they might be
Right,
forced
exactly.
to, but I've never heard of anyone voluntarily.
I think
do
they
that. But
gave
anyway,
24 hours.
any
to get the fuck out.
closing thoughts on Ukraine or Nobel Peace Prize or anything like that?
I tend to go with Carlo that this is going to go on. That there are mercenaries. There's Poland. There's arms manufacturing in South Korea. There's a lot of resources yet to be exhausted. And,
so the UN is going to kind of on their face extricate themselves and then really just hand it over, and it'll be continued without any peace agreement.
Yeah, that's my guess right now.
Well, we'll see.
This is 100+ year policy against Russia, with Ukraine as the weapon for 80 years. It's a big super tanker to turn around.
Yeah, and I mean,
Trump's not Nixon, Kissinger.
I just think they're going to freeze it. They're not going to give up, but they're going to freeze it, and they're going to de-escalate. They're going to de-escalate in that theater, and hope to return to it later. But it's just like they de-escalated with Vietnam, but they haven't, given up hope that they're going to get a neoliberal government in Vietnam, like they did in Cambodia. I hate to get the last word, and then Greg says so few things, and then he says one little thing, and I cut him off, and
wait. Where Greg says he punches above his weight in screen time. So good job, Greg. But yeah, so you get the last word. I will personally let you have the last word, Billy Bob.
Oh, me? Okay. No. Yeah, Greg is very efficient with his words, unlike myself. I kind of, me and Ian are on the same page. I think that at first, there's going to be this deal offered, and the EU and Ukraine is going to say no, and then there's going to be pressure applied, and they're going to say, okay, well, we'll just continue the war. But by the end of September, this back and forth horse trading, where the EU, for leverage purposes, pretends to be intransigent, and that we could never accept that, then they're going to see what other concessions they can get from that hard stance. And by the end of September is when the actual hostilities will cease, which will involve Ukraine moving their troops from some areas to the west of the Dnieper River. We'll
talk about it in October when we have a show, and we'll say who's right. Okay.
Yeah. And every show until then as well.
Yes, absolutely. Okay.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Carlo. Maybe this Friday we'll reconvene.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.